This is the Brave New Coin Crypto Conversation, hosted by Andy Pickering.
Hi everyone, Andy Pickering here. I'm your host and welcome to the Crypto Conversation, a Brave New Coin podcast where we talk to the people building the future in the Bitcoin, blockchain and cryptocurrency space. My guest today is Tal Kol. Tal is the co-founder and director of Orbs, a public blockchain for enterprise. Tal is the former head of mobile engineering at Wix. Tal is an open source enthusiast. He's an expert in blockchain development, and he has some things to say about Dapps, decentralized applications. He doesn't think they will work. He thinks the Dapp model is flawed. Now, Tal is also a veteran of an elite section of the Israel 8200 unit. If you don't know what the 8200 unit is, well, imagine the Israeli version of the NSA, military intelligence, and all the members of the unit are like the smartest 18 to 21-year-old kids in Israel. The 8200 unit works kind of like a technology incubator in Israel, and it's one of the reasons why Israel is such an innovator in the global technology space. Tal is a very articulate and thoughtful guy. Do stick around to the end. He has some extremely insightful things to say about human nature, power, corruption, where blockchain can help, and why the laws of physics suggest that in the future, as humans start to expand beyond Earth, it's inevitable that we will split into different races and end up at war with each other across the universe. Yes, exactly like in Star Trek, Battlestar Galactica, The Expanse, Star Wars, you know how that story goes. It's the Crypto Conversation, so of course we venture into the realm of sci-fi. But first, we're going to talk all about Orbs, Dapps, blockchain, Israel, Palestine, and more. This one goes deep. Welcome to the show, Tal.
Thank you, Andy. Thanks for having me.
Now, Tal, you are from Israel. You live in Israel. Israel is known as being a technology hub. It's known as being a startup nation with a population of 9 million. Israel has over 6,000 startups, I think. So on a per capita basis, Israel has probably more venture capital, more startups, more tech professionals than almost any other country in the world. I'm curious, Tal, what is it about Israel that has created this unique tech environment?
I think that it's really part of the culture. I think if you look at Israel, we don't have a lot of natural resources. There's not a lot of gas or oil or anything. The land is pretty small. We don't have a lot of space. So we focus on technology. We focus on innovation. That's the things we're good at. And the army also helps a lot. You mentioned the military. Military service is mandatory here. And a large part of modern military is intelligence. And many of the startups originate in Israel, start from the military.
Can you explain that, Tal? Because as I understand it, I think you mentioned it's a mandatory military service, which is when you're 18. Is that the case for everyone in Israel?
Yeah, guys do 3 years when they're 18, and girls, I think, do 2 years. And you can also opt to be an officer, like I was. Then you go a few more years. So I was a total, for example, of 5.5 years in the military.
I'm not sure how much you can talk about this, Tal, but it is really interesting. So there is this mandatory military service, and as part of that, you served as part of this elite cybersecurity intelligence unit, and you only end up in that unit if you show some pretty good skills in computer science, cryptography, intelligence. Can you tell me a little bit about how you were recruited to spend time in that unit and some of the work that you did?
Yeah, so I can't talk a lot about the work, but I can talk about the recruitment process. What they do is they actually invite every high school student to a series of tests just to see what they're good at. Are you good in maybe languages? For example, you could be a translator that would translate intelligence things, or maybe are you're very fit and you want to be, infantry, or you want to be a pilot, or you're good with computers and you want to go to military intelligence. My case was actually a funny story because the recruitment process is not perfect. They don't find all the guys there. And I am a little bit young for my age. So I was born at the end of November. And what happened was that by the time that they invited me for the tests, all the recruitment for military intelligence was pretty much finished. And I told them, you know what, guys, this is crazy. You want to tell me that every year you're losing all the young guys? And they told me, yes, exactly. That's what happens. So, I said, okay, I'm not going to go to military intelligence, although that's what I wanted. But luckily, one of my friends was invited to an interview from a military intelligence course, and he was in my class. And at the end of the interview, the interviewer, the commanding officer there, asked him, do you know somebody who would be able to answer this interview? And my friend said, you know what? Yeah, I have a friend, and I think he'll do quite well in this. And he gave my phone number. And this officer, who thought outside the box, gave me a call, interviewed me for 15 minutes over the phone, and that's how they found me. So everything is by chance.
Even though the 8200 unit is relatively small because it's, this elite cybersecurity intelligence outfit. From what I understand, a lot of people that have come out of that unit, and obviously yourself included, Tal, have gone on to either work in Silicon Valley or create a startup in Israel and just generally do quite well in the technology field, right?
There's actually a very popular book called Startup Nation that actually talks about the unit, talks about some of the, alumni, the interesting alumni that came from this unit. And although it's a relatively small unit, several thousand people, pretty much it's a very tight-knit community. It's a very good network. So all the alumni kind of like recruit other alumni for their startups. It's very well accepted to become an entrepreneur after being there. In my course, the specific class that I was in, we had 20 other guys with me. And out of the 20 in my year that did the same course that I did, I think all of them became entrepreneurs, and about 10 of the 20 sold companies by now. So that's pretty crazy.
Wow, that's amazing. That does make sense. I suppose you would come out of that really intense learning environment with quite a formidable set of skills in both business, leadership, entrepreneur. Talk to me about your journey then, Tal. What happened next after you've come out of this intense military intelligence environment? And I guess you're still young, right? But you'd have a formidable set of skills. What do you do now?
After spending, 5 years in 8200, you come out with a lot of professional experience that you don't really need to go to school. But I made the choice, unlike many of my friends, to go to school. So I went and studied in a place called the Technion. It's kind of like the Israeli MIT. And I studied electrical engineering for almost 4 years. And after that, I decided to be an entrepreneur. So actually, my first job was my own company. And I started this company with my commanding officer from my service. He's a good friend of mine. And we went into a long entrepreneurial way. And we formed, in the course of 7 years, 3 different companies. So that was pretty exciting. The first company failed miserably. The second one broke even. And the third one was pretty successful. And we managed to sell it to Wix.com. Wix is is a very well-known Israeli success story. Traded on NASDAQ. It's a brand advertising in the Super Bowl. And I was very fortunate to be acquired by them. I joined them for about 4 years. And that was very, very, very interesting, to see how an operation at that scale working. Wix has over 150 million users. So that's a scale that I wasn't used to. It was a very interesting learning experience for me.
So what was your introduction to blockchain? How do you go from military intelligence to trying to work out how to scale mobile apps to millions of people? Where does blockchain start to fit into this picture?
It doesn't really fit. I'm one of the people who's not very passionate about the trade and, the speculative nature of cryptocurrencies. I heard about the technology, but I've kind of, from the sidelines, I thought that this technology was just, speculative trade, and I wasn't very attracted to it. The thing that changed is after I left Wix, I kind of wondered what to do next in my career, and I had a couple of options. One of them was to go to Facebook, move to San Francisco, do mobile there. And another option was I heard of a company called Kik, and I just heard that they opened offices in Israel in order to create a cryptocurrency. And that was very fascinating for me. That's the first time when I asked myself, what, maybe it's not just Bitcoin, this entire space. I want to see what's the technology there. I want to understand why a company like Kik is pivoting. And I got in touch with the Kik management. And it was actually a very rapid love story. I had a very good click with them. And they actually wanted me to manage their site in Israel and to take the engineering team that they had into blockchain. Now, I had the background because I, had security and cryptography from the army, and I started leading Kik's team in Israel to develop a blockchain-based app. And Kik has, several dozens of millions of users, and that's exactly, the space I'm accustomed to. And to take this user base into blockchain was a very fascinating experience for me.
So why then, if you were happy doing the work there with Kik, what was the pivot to make you decide to go and start your own startup, which is Orbs, which is a public blockchain?
So when we worked at Kik, we decided to use one of the existing infrastructures. And Ethereum was a very good choice because Ethereum was very popular at the time. And I tried to build Kik's blockchain app on top of Ethereum and launch it. Now, Ethereum, until that point, was mostly serving small Dapps. And the Kik user base had, several dozens of millions of users. So what I tried to do is take the Ethereum infrastructure and use it in a completely different production scale than it was designed for. As you know, the transaction throughput of the entire Ethereum network is about 20 transactions per second. And if you look at Kik, how many messages are sent on Kik, it's about 250 million messages per day. So you can see a very, very large, order of magnitude of scale between the two. And when we tried to launch on Ethereum, it was a complete failure. Nothing worked. It was a pretty insane experience. And I got to see, from hands-on, just how immature blockchain infrastructure really is. I would say that most blockchain infrastructure is still at the proof of concept phase. You don't see a lot of production applications that are serving millions of users. And this infrastructure was not really designed for that purpose. And throughout this process, I understood that, the changes that need to be made in Ethereum are so vast that it's not an upgrade or, waiting for Ethereum 2.0. There are major product changes that need to be done in the infrastructure. And these ideas led to the birth of Orbs. I said, I don't want to wait for somebody else to build this infrastructure. I understand what needs to be done. I want to build the infrastructure, for large consumer companies to use. So that's the story of how Orbs was created.
Okay, that's interesting, Tal. So I want to talk about Orbs, and I think we're slowly building up to that point. But you've been quite outspoken about what you see as the design limitations of blockchain. I'd like to just get your thoughts on where you think blockchains do make sense, what kind of use case does make sense for the current design of blockchains, where the specific limitations are, and we'll build up to Orbs from there.
The first thing we need to think about is financial use cases versus non-financial use cases.
Sure.
And I think financial use cases like Bitcoin, currencies, stable coins, lending, decentralized finance, in a sense, this is, one bucket. And the second bucket is what you would call Web3. The new decentralized web where users own their own data.
Consumer applications, Dapps, all that stuff, right?
Yeah, decentralized Ubers instead of Ubers Inc. So you need to think of which world you connect to. And personally, I have to say that I connect to the Web3 world, to the new internet, not to the financial world. And this is because I feel that, the main obstacle in financial use cases is actually regulations. If you look at the main innovators in this space, and I think Facebook Libra is one of them, you would see that the hurdle there is not to make technology that can actually scale. That's not the problem. The hurdle there is to figure out with regulators how can you work with them and leave enough control in the hands of government for them to accept the decentralized aspects of money. Think about all the modern countries. For example, the U.S. The U.S. dollar is their greatest weapon. Their ability to have sanctions over other countries like North Korea are mostly economic in nature. And for them, for the U.S., for example, to let go of the monetary policy is a pretty big ask. So there's a lot of regulation involved. Personally, I see a lot of opportunity in Web3 because Web3 is actually, it doesn't hurt regulators that much. And there you just need to find benefit to consumers where, the Web3 can help them. And I do think that, most of the innovation there and the obstacles there are technology driven and not regulation driven. And I think there's a lot of good opportunity there for startups, just like Orbs. So personally, I'm very fascinated and passionate about the Web3 space.
Web3 indeed, and yes, it is the next evolution of the internet. Blockchain, of course, has a huge part to play there. We're going to take a quick break, Tal, and then we'll come back to talk about Orbs, decentralized applications, Dapps, why you think the Dapp model is flawed, and why Dapps cannot compete with their centralized counterparts.
The brave new coin initial exchange offering is here. Having led the way with institutional-grade digital asset data, research, analysis, and portfolio management since 2014, the BNC IO is live on Liquid.com from November 4th to the 8th. Unleash the power of BNC Pro with the BNC token. Research, chart, screen, analyze, and report, all on a single platform with no monthly fees and optimized for microtransactions. Secure your bonus BNC tokens today. A trusted team, working solutions, and real utility. The Brave New Coin IEO is on now at Liquid.com.
Okay, Tal, so Orbs is a public blockchain for enterprise use. What does that mean? What is Orbs?
You mentioned that Orbs is a public blockchain infrastructure, but the interesting thing is who are the customers? And the customers for Orbs are enterprises. And this is something that should strike you as weird. A public blockchain for enterprise. It's weird because we're pretty much the only ones who do that. If you look at most of the public infrastructures out there, like Ethereum, Cosmos, Tezos, EOS, all of them are mostly designed to serve Dapps. And we don't serve Dapps. We actually don't believe that Dapps will succeed. We believe that enterprises will succeed. And that is, something very strange that we're doing, but we believe it. we believe that this is the future. If you look at the other side of private blockchains, permission blockchains like IBM Hyperledger, they're usually catering to enterprise. And we don't like these as well. We don't believe that the future is about permission blockchains. We don't think the future is private. We think that the innovation and the disruption are public. So this weird marriage between public blockchain, that's where the disruption is from the technology side, with enterprise, that this is where the user base is. This is where the businesses are. This is, I think, the big opportunity in this space today, and I don't see many projects trying to figure out how to bring public blockchain to the enterprise.
What you're saying then is, correct me if I'm wrong, but you're saying you don't think that blockchain ecosystems such as EOS or Ethereum that support decentralized applications, you think that's a flawed model? You don't think it's going to work?
Exactly. So let's talk about those companies who try to build apps. Who is building a Dapp? And if you think about a Dapp is not a traditional business because a Dapp is a decentralized entity. Nobody owns it. It doesn't have shareholders. It doesn't have a CEO. It has a community. And this community has to be, driven by a token economy. And this is a new business format. The world has never seen such businesses, until recent years. And we're not really sure that this new business model is actually working. Try to think of, of the big ICO boom of 2016 to 2017. You saw, 3,000 Dapps raising money and being created. How many of these Dapps survived to this day? We saw people trying to decentralize everything, decentralized advertising, decentralized Ubers, and most of them disappeared. They can't compete. If you look at Uber Inc. versus a decentralized Uber, you see that Uber Inc. will, kick ass. I mean, a decentralized Uber cannot compete with Uber Inc. It's not efficient enough. So actually, I don't believe that the Dapp model is going to succeed. It cannot compete with traditional for-profit businesses.
Is it simply because the technology is still very early, and can we compare the, say, 2017 ICO bubble? Could you compare that to the first .com boom? And in the same way that those early .com companies were overvalued and most of them crashed and went to zero simply because the internet was still early and it wasn't ready to operate at scale. But look at where the internet is now. Can the same thing happen with Dapps? Is it simply because we're too early, or are you talking about a more fundamental problem?
It's a fundamental problem with the Dapp model. And yes, I think there is a fundamental difference. I don't think, many people say that the technology is not there yet, and once we get to the right scaling methods and so forth, then everything will be all right. And I actually disagree, because I think there is something very unique about Dapps, and this is their business model. Their business model is completely different from anything we've seen so far. We haven't seen a business operating as a decentralized entity. And this is something very strange. Think about an operation like Uber. If you want to create a ride-sharing service, how many people do you need to work together to create this? So Uber has, I would say, around 30,000 employees. And they all have distinct jobs. You have lawyers trying to fight regulators. You have people creating the apps. You have people doing marketing. You have jobs for 30,000 people. And if you try to replicate this model in a Dapp that doesn't have a CEO, that doesn't have somebody paying salaries, it's all a peer-to-peer token-based economy, then you would need a decentralized economy that could give jobs to 30,000 people. And they have, hundreds of different roles. Now, this is too complicated to build. The most successful token economies that we've seen so far, for example, Bitcoin, are very simple. How many roles do you have in Bitcoin? You have pretty much 3 roles. You have, just users, you have full nodes, and you have miners. And the token economy of Bitcoin is simple enough to be able to accommodate this. Now, if you try to do something more complicated than Bitcoin, for example, find roles, to motivate roles of 30,000 people, this doesn't work. Only very simple decentralized token economies are working. And if you look at the use cases out there that are actually successful, you would see that there are 2 use cases that are actually working for a Dapp decentralized token economy. And those are cryptocurrencies and blockchain infrastructures. So things like Bitcoin, Zcash, that's kind of working. And things like EOS and Orbs and Cosmos and Tezos are kind of working. Almost every other use case, for example, decentralized advertising or decentralized ride sharing, they have failed to operate as a Dapp form.
Let's dig into Orbs then. So Orbs is, you describe it as a public blockchain infrastructure that's designed for enterprise. And I think Orbs is somewhat unique in that your goal is to bring the full value of permissionless blockchain infrastructure to enterprise business, right? So at a high level, what does that mean? What are the use cases? Who are the target customers?
So I mentioned, ride sharing and Uber. So let's see how can that work. So ride sharing, I think, is an area where people said, blockchain could fit. Why? Because there are big middlemen like Uber that people say are just too powerful. They control the entire ecosystems. The drivers are not very happy. The passengers are not very happy. And this calls, let's decentralize something there. And the first thing that we try to do, the entire entire industry is we said, you know what, let's kick Uber out of the equation. Let's create a decentralized Uber, where passengers find the drivers directly and have a peer-to-peer economy between them. This is the decentralized Uber idea, and this simply doesn't work. We tried to do that in 2016 and 2017, and it doesn't work. I now believe that ride-sharing should still be done by the Ubers of the world. So the customer have become Uber Inc. or Lyft, for example. And the big question is, why would Uber Inc. or Lyft want or need blockchain? What is the value proposition that blockchain can give them?
That's exactly the question, Tal. That's the question of the day.
And I think that the answer that the world will slowly start seeing is that these businesses today are competing on many, different dimensions among each other. Uber and Lyft are competing with each other very aggressively. And one of those dimensions is trust. So basically, I believe that in order to become trustworthy, they would have to use something like blockchain technology, because this is the only way the human race today knows how to prove that you're trustworthy without just saying, trust me. Because here you don't need to trust people, you can just trust code. You have smart contracts, everything is transparent, anyone can audit anything. So basically take anything that you don't trust Uber with, and these things would work better if they're moved to blockchain. So what I did is I did a mental exercise, and I tried to find, some of the lawsuits that people have against Uber, just to see where are the cracks, where are the areas that people distrust an ecosystem like Uber. And there are many examples. One example, you see lawsuits from drivers, for example, that are upset that Uber don't, distribute the rides in a fair way. People actually claim that if you drive for both Uber and Lyft, Uber know this and they stop sending rides your way. There's actually a lawsuit about this today. And when Uber says, you know what, guys, we're not doing that. We're not discriminating drivers that are also driving for Lyft. There's no way to check that. Nobody knows. The only thing they can say is just trust us that we don't do this. A different example is, people are claiming that if your battery level is low, Uber is going to charge you more for the ride. And you ask Uber, are you, raising prices just because my battery is low? And Uber say, no, we're not doing these things. And there's no way to check. And what I believe will start happening is that these companies, in order to prove that they're indeed not doing those things, to be completely transparent, they're going to start running these algorithms over blockchain. And by doing that, anyone could audit and verify that what they're claiming is indeed taking place. Show me the code. Show me that it runs over blockchain so I can audit that it's indeed what's running, and I will trust you that that's what you're doing. And actually Uber, they don't really have the incentive not to do that, because if we can bring the costs low enough, if it's not expensive to do this, Uber don't want to lie and cheat. They don't make their money from manipulating the ride allocation algorithm. They make their money from having the best ecosystem with the most drivers and the most passengers. And the way that they'll get there is by, winning on trust. So today, nobody cares about trust. We know that. But you see all the companies like Facebook, they're talking about trust. They understand that trust with their user base is important.
That's right, Tal, and you are right. Facebook are talking about trust. Apple are pivoting towards trust and privacy. So I think it has been a slow move. The world is starting to move in that direction, right?
Let's see how Facebook does it. Zuckerberg, in almost every keynote he gave in the last, I would say, 2 years, privacy is right up there. He's talking about privacy all the time. And when they say that Facebook is committed to privacy, how can we know? And when we ask Facebook, are you committed to privacy? Like, how can you guarantee this? You know what they tell us? They just say, trust us. We'll do better. We'll improve. Trust us. And we don't want to trust people. Like, it's impossible to trust people. People are easily corruptible. People change their mind. People are incentivized by their shareholders to abuse the trust that you give in them. That you put in them. The only thing that you can really trust is technology. You can trust blockchain because you can trust math. And if Facebook would have really wanted to prove certain things that they do or don't do, the best way to do that is don't say, trust us, say, we use a technology where you can, just audit by yourself, and we can prove that we're doing what we're claiming that we're doing. So I think that the world is slowly going to move there.
Can you talk about any of your real world customers at the moment? We've used Uber as a potential case study example. What can you tell us about where Orbs is at right now and what you're actually working on? What can we expect to see?
The hard work now is to find the low-hanging fruits. So I'll give you some of the use cases that are low-hanging. And most of the companies working on these use cases are pretty well known. And most of these, endeavors are not public yet. One of the big problems of working with large enterprises, Uber size, is that everything is hush-hush until it's ready to be public. So I won't name names, but I can talk about the use cases. One very interesting use case is, what do you do with user data? Companies that hold personal data of their users are very vulnerable, because if this data is mismanaged, it can be stolen. If this happens, it's a huge PR nightmare, and it's a very bad thing that happens to the users. So one of the big problems is, how can you protect user data? And it turns out that blockchain can play a very key role in doing that. And the way it works is that you just don't hold the data by yourself. You keep the data on the blockchain and you encrypt it in a way that you can prove that you can't access the data without the user's consent. So you can actually prove that the users own the data and not you. You're not a custodian of their data. They actually have full permissions and managerial rights over their own data. And this is one very exciting use case. It has a lot of applications. Another interesting use case that we see today in production has to do with rights management. Rights management and copyright is a very problematic area in the world today. It's very difficult to know who owns what, especially if you look at media. For example, let's look at the photographs that you have. There have been recent laws in the European Union that companies like Facebook and Google, it's called the copyright law, they're going to have to pay when they show search results and they show a photo that they don't own in the search results, and they're making money off of these, search results page. They're going to have to pay some royalties for these images. And that's a big problem because nobody knows who owns those images. So another use case for blockchain is to start creating registries where people register what they own. For example, with music or photos. So we see that as well as a pretty nice use case. Another good use case is to prove authenticity of things. A big problem we have today with the world is that so many of the things are fake, from fake news to fake photos. It's very easy. I don't know if you saw even videos today. Have you seen deepfakes? How they can take a video of somebody and just change what they're saying? It's pretty insane.
It is insane. Yeah. So let's talk about that. That's a great use case, because with the rise of deepfakes, and that technology is moving so quickly, and if you combine that with fake news and nation states trying to manipulate each other's elections and seed political disarray, social media, everything is so connected. I can see the use case there, Tal.
And the use cases are so vast, it will take many years until we figure out how to fix all of the problems. But some of the problems are relatively easily fixable. For example, let's say that you have a photo and you want to prove that this photo was not doctored. It's very easy to take Photoshop and change the photo. And it's very easy to do. All you have to do is take the photo and you take a hash of it and you register the hash on a blockchain. And since a blockchain is provably immutable, you can know that this hash, when it was saved, that is the official version of the image. So that's one way to prove the authenticity of things. Provenance. They actually do it, from coffee beans to cannabis to photo. Provenance is a very good use case for blockchain.
Sure. Can I ask you, Tal, do you ever feel any tension between your past as a military intelligence officer and the work you do now, like, is there any chance that blockchain makes some military intelligence activities, signal intelligence, that kind of thing? Does it make that stuff harder for military intelligence, or are nation states just one step ahead? Where's the tension, or is there tension there?
Cryptography in general is making it difficult for nation states, to gather intelligence. So that's well known. I think the only thing in blockchain that is threatening really to nation states is losing control over monetary policy. This, is a very serious problem, and nation states are very, very, very scared of it. If you think about, I mentioned it before, that the greatest weapon that the U.S. has is the U.S. dollar. Just by having sanctions over other countries, this is, the most effective means today to get their way. And if you don't control monetary policy, for example, in Bitcoin, you don't control the monetary policy. You can't say, I'm going to confiscate your money on Bitcoin. So this loss of control is dangerous to nation states. So I do think it's going to take a long time until regulators figure out what they're willing to let go of and what they're not. I don't see Bitcoin coming into mainstream adoption anytime soon just because of these problems. And I think companies like Facebook with Libra are trying to have this dialogue with the regulators and figure out the correct balance, and it's going to take a very long time. So actually in financial use cases, I do see many, many, many problems and hurdles. Opportunity I see is mostly in the Web3 areas. I do think that in these areas, in protecting user data, in creating more trustworthy companies, you're actually helping the regulators. If you look at where regulators are concerned in these areas, for example, the European Union is very, very active, and GDPR basically says that they want users to own their own data and not the companies to own and be custodian of the user data. And one of the great ways to do that is with blockchain. So I actually think that blockchain in these areas can really help the regulators actually, make sure that there's no abuse going on.
Paint me a picture of what you think happens from a regulatory perspective. You said that you don't think Bitcoin will be adopted by the mainstream anytime soon. But even so, Bitcoin is slowly doing what Bitcoin does. It's churning away. The blocks are coming out. The halving is coming up. More users are joining the system. What happens if Bitcoin does continue to get bigger and bigger as its network effects continue to develop? At what point does America or Israel, at what point do they step in? And if that is the case, what do they do?
First of all, it's very difficult to stop Bitcoin. Bitcoin is one of those unstoppable apps because anyone can mine it, and it's very difficult to regulate.
Exactly.
The only thing you can regulate is where Bitcoin meets fiat. For example, if you want to convert your Bitcoin to US dollars or use your Bitcoins to acquire services in the real world, for example, pay for a cup of coffee or buy a car or buy an apartment, these are the areas that are easy to regulate. In the virtual bubble, it's very hard to stop Bitcoin, Bitcoin to other cryptocurrencies. But everything that Bitcoin touches in the real world, it's relatively easy to regulate. And I don't think people will be very much interested in Bitcoin if they can't use it for anything in the real world. Now, on the other hand, I don't think regulators want to kill Bitcoin. I think regulators are okay with Bitcoin, and it has become, big enough that it's not in any immediate danger, but I don't think it's gonna get much, much bigger. It may get 10 times as big, but how many people today are exposed to Bitcoin? I would say a couple of dozens of millions of people. Out in a planet of several billions, we only have a few dozens of millions that are actually exposed to this. I don't think that Bitcoin is going to reach billions of people. I don't think it's going to happen anytime. I don't think it's even going to happen ever. I think we're going to see other currencies where regulators do have a stop button that they can confiscate tokens if they want to, or they can say that, we don't want to do business with North Korea, for example. And they're not going to let go of these powers anytime soon, in my eyes.
Tal, earlier this year, there were a series of announcements suggesting that the Trump administration had been in contact with your team at Orbs to discuss blockchain solutions to help encourage Israeli-Palestinian peace plans. That sounds like a little bit of a clickbaity headline, because I think it's slightly ridiculous to suggest that blockchain could solve one of the world's more contentious disagreements. But can you speak to that? Was that headline correct? Is Orbs really working with the Trump team, with the US State Department, as was reported?
So these projects, you have to understand, are very, very slow moving, and they're mostly pitches that are advancing slowly as proof of concepts. So I wouldn't say that Trump personally is involved, but there are people who are thinking about these things and are looking into blockchain as a possible layer of additional solutions to help improve things. I wouldn't go as much as saying that blockchain is going to solve all the peace problems, but there are several areas of trust where blockchain can be a very good catalyst for several problems, and I'll give you some of these problems. One of the big issues is with giving aid to these areas of the world. And the big problem is that you usually don't know where the aid is going to. For example, let's say that, the US wants to give aid money to the Palestinian Authority. The big problem is what happens if this money turns out to be used for terrorism. And this risk actually reduces the amount of aid that is being given. Just because you can't track how the aid is used. So one of the great things that blockchain can be very, very effective in doing is to add trackability and trust, so you know where the money is actually used. And when you can guarantee that money is not abused and not used for terrorism, then you can lift many of the sanctions and increase the aid that is being given. And I think this is something positive that both sides want to do. There's a lot of interest to give this aid, and there's a lot of interest from the people who suffer and need this aid in order to survive, to receive it. And obviously both sides don't want, third parties, for example, like terrorist groups, to get hold of these funds and abuse them for other purposes. So this is one example of how we can use blockchain to make this environment slightly better.
And that's a good example. I suppose the difficult part would be getting the US government, the Palestinians and the Israeli government to all agree on what a definition of terrorism is. I also understand that your team recently hosted a delegation of Palestinian CEOs and CTOs at Ethereal, which I think is an Ethereum conference in Tel Aviv. Is that right?
Yeah, so Ethereal is the yearly Ethereum conference, the official one, by consensus. And this year it happened to be in Tel Aviv, which was pretty exciting because that's our home turf. And one of the interesting things we've done is we've invited a group of about 20 CEOs from Palestine to actually join the conference. And the reason for that is that, we really see blockchain as a very, very, promising area where remote work can be done. There are many, many companies, the blockchain space is very much, decentralized in nature. Many of the companies there operate overseas and are very accepting towards workers overseas. And one of the, main things to improve the economy for Palestinians is to find more jobs where they can sustain themselves. And by connecting these CEOs, and they have, IT companies and software development companies with this space and helping them, find customers, find people who would buy their services, their IT services. I think we can really, really advance and, do a little good. So that's what we tried to do, and it was pretty successful, actually. We found several of these IT companies actually doing blockchain-based projects, and that was very exciting to see.
Thank you, Tal. Let's go to a quick break, and then when we come back, let's do the Crypto Conversation hot take round.
Crypto, the asset class that doesn't sleep. The markets move quickly with profits made and lost around the clock. It's a whirlwind, and you've got to keep up. You need enhanced tools that deliver timely data and accurate analytics so you can make informed decisions. You need BNC Pro, a customizable, institutional-grade suite of applications to help you manage your crypto investments all in one place. Get accurate market data, track your trades or custom holdings, and see profit and loss at a glance. Monitor any asset, trading pair, or exchange using Brave New Coin's trusted market data. Integrate BNC Newsfeed and filter it to deliver only the news that matters to you. Never miss an opportunity, save time, and make better informed decisions. Finally, the all-in-one terminal experience you need to master this brave new asset class. BNC Pro, launching Q4 2019. Join the waitlist today at bravenewcoin.com.
So, Tal, I like to finish each podcast with just a quick round of crypto hot takes. Are you up for it?
Okay, sounds great.
All right, I want your hot takes, your hot fire. Tal Kol from Orbs. Here we go. Where do you sit on the Bitcoin maximalist to multi-coin opportunist spectrum?
So I think there is something very charming with Bitcoin. Bitcoin is not perfect, but being the first, you can't move Bitcoin from being the first. So I am a little bit of a maximalist in this regard, but I do think that there are many aspects of Bitcoin that Bitcoin is not solving. For example, privacy. And I don't think that Bitcoin will ever solve them. So I do see multi-coins for these aspects.
Tal, what would you say is your firmest conviction crypto opinion?
Don't believe the hype. I think the industry is very much hype-driven, and I hate when industries are hype-driven because hype is usually bad. And I really like to see industries maturing to, beyond the hype. And I'm just waiting until this happens enough. So don't believe the hype. That's my conviction.
Don't believe the hype. Nice. I love it. Tal, Facebook's LibraCoin, good or bad for the crypto ecosystem, and why?
I think it's good. I think the main hurdle with financial use cases is regulation. And if you do regulation, you need somebody who can talk to the regulator. And Facebook can talk to the regulator. And it's not going smoothly, and that's okay, because this dialogue is very, very, very complicated. But I don't think that, startups are able to do this dialogue effectively. So I think it's advancing the industry very well, but it's going to take years until we figure out what to really do with it.
Tal, UBI as a potential fix for AI-induced automation. What do you think? Is this a good idea?
I don't think we have a choice. UBI, I think, is going to be a must-have because in a perfect world, not everybody has to work. When we have machines sustaining most of our needs, I don't think the entire population would have to actually work in order to sustain itself. We could do that in other ways, and we just have to find ways to divide the wealth a little bit more evenly. And I think UBI is one way to do it. I'm not sure that UBI directly is going to work, but something along the lines would have to be because the wealth disparity is just growing, and it's going to be insane unless we fix it.
Very interesting, Tal. Hey, Bill Gates famously said, we tend to overestimate what we can accomplish in 2 years and underestimate what we can accomplish in 10 years. What does the blockchain space look like in 10 years' time, Tal?
Difficult question. I think in 10 years, we're going to know what the effective use cases are. I think this is the million-dollar question today. Is the use case of blockchain decentralized finance, or is it Web3? And I don't think it's all of the above. I don't think blockchain is going to be used everywhere. I think there are very specific use cases. There are going to be the killer apps. And we only found one so far, which is Bitcoin. This is the killer app of blockchain today, but it's very problematic for the regulators. So I think finding the next killer use case, that's the task for the next 10 years.
Tal, William Gibson said the future is already here. It's just not evenly distributed. What's an example of the future being here right now, but most people just aren't really aware of it?
Good question. I think that the biggest problem, is, I think governance, I would say, is the most interesting thing in this regard because, the large populace, most of us, the way we think governance, like the way we believe governance takes place and who makes the decision is very different from what the 1% sees. And I think that they're seeing a different world than we are. I think that this is one of the biggest problems that we have to face today, because we were taught that things are working in one way, but we don't understand that the world is really controlled by other means.
That's a very interesting statement.
Do you want to dig deeper?
Sure.
Well, I think that what blockchain taught us is that trust is a very tricky thing, and you really can't trust anything. Everything is up for manipulation and corruption. Power is corrupting in nature. You give somebody too much power and they're going to abuse it. Why? Because they can. This is human nature. And it's not something, to be pissed off about. It's just the way things work. And I don't think there's an easy solution to this. Look at how governments are chosen, just becoming more of a popularity contest. Nobody's talking about, the real issues anymore. It's just who can sway the masses to their own opinions, who can spread the most fake news. These are the most effective means to get things done. I think the Trump administration showed us that, this is the way, and this is the most effective thing. And I think this is problematic, because eventually, I don't think that, even democracy, it's easily exploitable. And we actually don't know what to do with it. We don't have any solution against fake news. We don't have any solution about, foreign entities meddling with what we have. And we saw that, this big data era that we live in is so very easily manipulated from outside. So I think that technologies that can put a little order in how things work, technologies that can make sure that our elections are pure, technologies that can make sure that, opinions that are stated and we know who stated them, and we don't have, other parties interfering that we don't want them to interfere. I think that the technologies that can take us there will emerge in the next 10 years, and they're crucial for democracy to succeed.
Very interesting, Tal. Let's zoom out. What's the long-term future for the human race? Tal, do you see dystopia or utopia?
Whew, wow. Okay, philosophy. I think the biggest problem of the human race is that we have a limit on how far we can expand. And I'll tell you what I mean. If you look at the physics, at the numbers game, you see that the universe is just simply too big. If the human race will eventually expand outside Earth, if we're talking that long term, it's not going to remain one race. And this is a huge problem, and we don't have a solution for that. The problem is the speed of light. It's a very hard barrier, and you can't go over it. And the distance between planets is so big that you really can't have a conversation between two people on two different planets. Why? Because it's going to take several minutes to several hours for the information to get across. And this is a hard limit. We have no solution to go over this. And what this will cause eventually is that as the human race expands outside of Earth, we're not going to have one race anymore. It's going to be very different race on every different planet. It's going to be different cultures. And what we know that happens eventually when we have different races is that they have different intentions and different goals, and then they start warring with each other. So I think that the future of the human race is war, unfortunately.
Wow, that was a fantastic and deeply unsettling answer, Tal. I love it. Yeah, it's just, we're slowly coming up the Kardashev scale to become a type 1 civilization, and what happens after that is anyone's guess, right?
Yeah, big problems are ahead.
It has been a lot of fun talking to you today, Tal. Please take us out. The microphone is yours. Tell the listeners how they can find you on your various platforms, where they can go if they'd like to dig into the Orbs project. The microphone is yours.
So personally about me, if you want to, I have a blog, if you want to read some of my opinions, many about blockchain, some of them about open source, Google my name on Medium. Tal Kol at Medium. And about Orbs, go to orbs.com, orbs.com. That's where you'll find most of the information. Everything is open source on GitHub, so just Orbs Network on GitHub, another good place. It's a decentralized project. There's no company that owns it. So be part of the community, join in. You'll be an equal citizen.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andy, for having me.
Wow, how good was Tal? A fascinating guy on so many levels, whether you agree with his perspectives or not. It was a real pleasure to talk with Tal. And I love it when podcast guests really express themselves during the crypto conversation hot take round. And, it's not really about hot takes. It's more about just getting people to say what they really think. And I love how with crypto, there's inevitably this crossover between crypto, blockchain, technology issues, privacy issues, futurism, science fiction, and it's really fascinating to hear what people have to say. I hope you agree. I hope you enjoyed it. And look, if you did enjoy the podcast, please do subscribe to the podcast on whatever podcast app you are using so you know when each new weekly episode drops. And if you especially enjoyed the show, please do leave us a rating in Apple Podcasts. Give us a 5-star rating. If you're so inclined, feel free to even leave us a review. Any feedback on the show, you can get at me on Twitter at Andy Pickering NZ or talk to us at Brave New Coin. Okay, we're done. We're out of here. This was the Crypto Conversation for Brave New Coin